Hello, I'm Mary McCartney and welcome to the London Sales Gallery Tour, which coincides with the specially curated Women Artists season, in which Sotheby's continues to bring female creativity to the forefront. We'll be exploring the modern and contemporary evening art auctions and the now evening art auction. First, we're going to speak to Helena Newman, who's going to show us one of the top lots from the London sale, a stunning masterpiece by Kandinsky from his Murnau period. Helena, thank you for joining me today, and I think we should dive straight in and kick off with that amazing Kandinsky.
Well, thank you, Mary. It's the star of the show. The Kandinsky is a magnificent painting, probably one of the most important by the artist to come to auction ever. 1910 is the year it was painted, and it's just at that cusp of Kandinsky going on that journey into abstraction, which is going to set the scene for everything that comes in the 20th century, right through to the abstract expressionists.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because you can see that as a landscape, but some of those key shapes are starting to take place within that canvas.
You can see the figuration still there, but it has this very strong momentum to it and this diagonal thrust and energy, which is both musical and abstract and incredibly powerful.
This piece probably is like nothing that's been on the market.
So the story is just incredible. I mean, we talked about the quality of the painting, but the story is one of those incredible restitution stories. The painting was originally one of the high points of the collection of Siegbert and Johanna Margarete Stern, who lived in Berlin and Potsdam in the 1920s, part of that sort of glittering circle of literary, artistic, cultural milieu of the 20s, where this kind of circle was frequented by Kafka and Einstein.
I want to be there with them now.
Martin Buber and all these amazing giants of that period. This painting hung in their dining room in Potsdam, and they had this great collection which was tragically dispersed when the Nazis came to power and they had to flee. Margarete fled to Holland, and the painting was lost and sold off in that period, and it's only just now come to be restituted to the heirs of the original owners, who are now the sellers of this work.
And there's this feeling of it being restored back to the family, that it almost takes me back to that original dining room, thinking of all those evenings spent with that painting with the families. Well, thank you for bringing that to our attention today. It's a masterpiece, really beautiful, really inspiring, and I really appreciate you bringing it to my attention and telling me more about it.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you're going to tell me about the amazing Gerhard Richter piece.
We are so excited to have another great masterpiece by Gerhard Richter leading our sales in March. It's one of only 5 squeegee paintings in this scale left in private hands, which is pretty staggering.
Wow.
He's only done 24 paintings on this size or greater, 16 of which are in museum collections. So this really is an incredibly rare opportunity.
And so tell me about the scale, the size of it, just so so the viewer can imagine.
When you're faced with a painting on this scale, it's like you're faced with a kind of wall of colour. It's like a waterfall in many respects, just the towering canvas in front of you. And it was really in 1986, which is the year he created this painting, when he discovered the squeegee and started using that as his primary creation tool rather than a brush. He'd been creating works with a brush in the kind of traditional manner, but often blurring the image. He started in the 1960s basing his paintings on photographs from magazines and newspapers, and then started painting in a more abstract way where he was trying to remove his hand and remove the artist's direction from the creation of the image. With his abstract paintings, he was trying to come up with images that were more based on chance and, you know, trying to challenge what it was to be a painter in an age of photography.
I think that's what is so beautiful about it. I imagine just pulling over that squeegee of paint, not knowing exactly what you're going to get.
It's a pretty unique tool in its own right. It's a tool that is simultaneously creating and destroying with each kind of movement across the surface. So you've got this revealing and obscuring happening simultaneously, with each layer informing the one that sits underneath it. It's got elements of photo painting. Underneath the squeegee, you can see almost like a sky or a seascape. There's a very different underlayer beneath the abstract gestures on top. So there's elements of photography, photo painting, and abstraction all brought together within this image. It's a truly extraordinary painting.
I think that's what really resonates. There isn't this glossiness about it. There's this sort of earthiness and physicality to it, which has quite a lot of depth.
Richter's approach to creating abstract paintings is much more meditative and thought out than someone like Jackson Pollock or the abstract expressionists, whose work is often compared to Gerhard Richter. I mean, he's seen as the father of contemporary abstraction. And for that, he's taking a much more conceptual approach to abstract painting than any other artist in the 20th century.
James, it's really been very informative talking to you about this, and I loved learning more about the process and sort of placing it within Gerhard Richter's career. So yes, thank you very much.
Not at all.
And now from that epic Gerhard Richter, we're going to talk about Dance on the Beach with Thomas Boyd Bowman. Thomas, it's such a pleasure to meet you today. Tell me about the Edvard Munch that's coming up for auction.
So this extraordinary painting, 4 metres wide, was painted by Edvard Munch between 1906 and 1907. And it was actually commissioned by a friend of his, the theatre impresario Max Reinhart, for his new theatre in Berlin. Dance on the Beach relates very closely to a really amazing composition which was achieved just a few years earlier called The Dance of Life. And in it we have 2 of Munch's great lovers and the loves of his life, Millie Taulo on the left, the blonde, and the brunette, Tuula Larsson, on the right. And in the middle of it is a dance set on this strand of a Norwegian fjord in the summer when the sun never sets in Scandinavia.
It feels like a very honest and emotional piece.
He only had a very short relationship with Millie Taulo, but who was really important to him, and he never really forgot her. And on the right, Tuula Larsson, who very famously, they had a really heightened relationship, and actually the breakup involved a pistol going off and Munch being shot in the hand, which had only taken place a few years before this painting was actually completed. And these emotional dramas were what Munch drew on continuously throughout the rest of his life to inform his compositions. Munch had spent some time in Italy and he really adored the effect of frescoes. And there's that sense of great permanence. There's a real truth to fresco painting, partly because of that dryness, that surface, which it feels honest, very truthful, and that directness is what Munch was searching for. But to use such vivid colours, that amazing, vibrant orange and green and red and blue, also draws it right back to that sense of it being primary, really raw and fresh.
I'd love to know more about the history of the Reinhardt frieze. Could you tell me about it?
So after it's commissioned, it goes up and is installed in Max Reinhardt's theatre in Berlin. But it only actually stays up for a few years and ends up being broken up and sold to different collectors. This work, along with a couple of others, ended up with Kurt Glaser, who was an amazing collector of cutting-edge, avant-garde, modern art. Though sadly, he and his family faced persecution with the rise of the Nazi Party, and much of his collection was disposed of. This painting ends up with Thomas Olsen, the Norwegian collector, and is in fact the only painting from the frieze not currently housed in a German museum.
Well, thank you for talking to me about it. It's really sort of added to the depth and emotion that I was already feeling. Really special. Like a really beautiful painting you're going to tell me about now, really uplifting. Pablo Picasso, tell me about the painting in the auction, please.
So we are delighted to be offering a portrait of Picasso's daughter, Maya. It's called The Girl with the Boat, and it comes from a series of pictures that he painted at the very beginning of 1938. Picasso at this time had been undergoing a massive shift, both in his private life, but also artistically. The relationship that had propelled him towards this point was that he had with Maya's mother, Marie Thérèse, which was sadly coming to an end. At the same moment, he had met and fallen in love with Dora Maar. And Maya's birth in the middle of this emotional sort of turmoil acted really as a sort of beacon of light, of sort of pure joy and pleasure, as we see so much of her mother in her.
It was composed just after he'd finished Guernica.
Absolutely. I mean, that amazing, dark, tumultuous composition that is Guernica, the most powerful, and aggressive statement about the human condition, about politics, about, what's going on in the world. And yet he very shortly after produces this jewel-like series of pictures, which are just expressions of love. And that's one of the most amazing things about Picasso, is that he lives a whole life and he has the capacity to express every aspect of it. Compositionally, he actually places her right in the middle of the picture plane. So he's gone right down to her level, and she's given all of the sort of stature and grandeur of a full-length portrait, but that of a child. It was owned by Gianni Versace, and that was actually the last time it was sold at auction, was coming from his collection nearly 20 years ago. This one's quite so sort of chic with her check dress and amazing vibrancy of the colour.
Yeah. I was thinking that. I was wondering if we'd be able to look at his collections and see some influence from that. But I'm sure he found it inspiring. And this piece was hanging recently in the Picasso Museum. Yeah, it really comes across as a really special and personal painting. Thank you. Now I'll be speaking to Emma Baker about the fabulous Barbara Kruger, the perfect opportunity to bring female artists centre stage. Emma, I'm excited about the lots that you're going to talk me through, starting with Barbara Kruger.
We've got some incredible female artists on offer in our sales this March, and it's part of a wider thing that we're doing at Sotheby's to really bring attention to female artists, makers. We're having not only incredible works in our evening sales and day sales, but also having a full-on exhibition, which you're very much a part of, and then also having a whole auction, which is just female artists. But yeah, Barbara Kruger, she is just one of the most important artists of our time, undoubtedly. Super exciting for me personally, to have Barbara Kruger in our evening auction. She really was starting to create these pieces in the 1980s, which our work is from 1989. But they're so relevant now just because of the hyper-image culture that we find ourselves in with social media, sort of the quite harsh political realities we find ourselves in as well. So the toughness and the pithiness of her work really does speak to us today, more so than it ever has.
In researching her more, I hadn't realised that she worked at Mademoiselle. And was she an art director?
Yeah, exactly. So she trained at Parsons School of Design under Diane Arbus.
Oh, yeah.
And then she came to the world of graphic design. And that's when she really was aware of this usage of imagery in like the 1960s and just how that was directed to kind of principally the female viewer, and just the idea of consumption and the idea of these very flattering consumer images that were manipulating really the readers.
Because what's so important is the visual, but also the words that she uses.
What she's doing is just injecting the female perspective into this history of images, which has been patriarchal, very male-dominated, and especially for an artist who's part of the second wave feminist movement, sort of the 1970s, 60s. She shines a light on this, like no other artist really had done so strongly before.
It's two canvases that butt up against each other,
exactly,
right?
Yeah.
But it feels like one of them feels like you're in an operating room or a procedure is about to happen. And then the other one seems very much about human consumerism.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, growing up, because I'm very much into meat-free Mondays and vegetarian cooking, so that kind of thing of industry and, the world today comes to mind.
The capitalist machine. And
the capitalist machine.
These hierarchies of control and power and...
Industry,
yeah. And you do have these very juxtaposed images. One which is, as you say, like an operating table. Someone who looks like they're about to get some sort of barbaric brain surgery. And then the other one, which is a man sort of feeding himself with this really quite gristly piece of meat, sort of almost looks uncooked. It is just kind of this really sort of hyper control. Like she's trying to reveal the structures at work, I think, in our consumption of images, and to let us question what's going on in this dynamic between text and image.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see how that does. I think there's going to be a bidding war over
I hope
that one.
so. There should be. So going on for another female artist, another female maker as well, and an artist who does also use that point of view as very important in her work is Cecily Brown. So she's a painter, really inspired by abstract expressionism, by Francis Bacon, and her work is this really incredible coalition of abstraction and figuration.
I could really see it in this painting, the Willem de Kooning connection.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's called The Nymphs Have Departed from 2014, and it's a direct art historical reference back to, I think it's Rubens, and his depiction of the whole mythology of Diana, who is a goddess of fertility, the moon, very kind of feminine ideals. And that throughout art history has been an incredibly important sort of dialogue through Titian, I think Vermeer, just a whole host of classical artists who looked at that theme and with a very sort of erotic take on it.
So interesting to then have her come in and do a female, kind of her female perception of the whole piece.
100%.
It takes that sort of, it sort of turns it on its head a bit, doesn't it? It's quite exciting.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And I think what she does is she denies the viewer sort of any fixed representation. So there's a suggestion of a body part or a figure here and there, and it disappears in the brushwork because she's so good with oil paint and she's so good with these fluid, quick marks.
I can tell you love this piece.
Yeah, I really do.
And tell me, where does this particular painting sit in her career?
She came into the whole scene in the late 1990s, kind of off the back of the whole young British artist movement. But she decided she didn't really like the affiliation with those kind of sensation, shock artists. She was more into her own thing. She decided to remove herself, so she was London-based. She now lives and works in New York. So this work really comes at a point where she's established herself, and it's just come at a moment where she's looking more focusedly, I think, at art historical forms and sort of flora and fauna and bodies, and not just the hard-edged sort of erotic content, which her earlier work is fairly explicit. But here it's more of an allusion, I think, to these forms and these figures with this art historical basis, which is just, gorgeous when you see it in person.
Tell me about the next piece.
The next piece is a work by Flora Yuknovich. She's an artist who you can see the influence of Cecily Brown on her work. It's really obvious. So she's incredibly young. I think she's only in her early 30s. She's represented by Victoria Miro. And we've seen incredible competition, excitement over her work. And she's an artist who really is sort of successor and heir to the work that Cecily Brown really laid down in the 90s and mid-2000s. And again, it's all to do with the male gaze and sort of upending it and overturning it and repossessing it as a woman artist.
That's what I love about it. It's like you think you know what you're getting, and then when you look at it, it's sort of the brushstrokes are much harsher. Like it does have, you're going into this romantic and you're like, actually, it's got a lot more turmoil and physicality to it as well.
Yeah, that's it. And she takes on this Rococo palette and these Rococo influences specifically. Like that's her period of art history, whereas someone like Cecily Brown might take a broader view, but she's focused on this particular era in art history when they're very sort of titillating composition. Someone like Fragonard, Boucher, presenting women in this very sort of whimsical light in like a garden on a swing. And she really does overturn that sense of the male gaze. So you can kind of, when you look at it, it's sort of a work where from a distance you think you see something, but up close it totally disappears just because she's so good with like brushwork.
Yeah, beautiful. And so great to have it
as
our
here.
Beautiful backdrop right now. I can tell how passionate you are about these pieces. So it's been really incredible chatting with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary.
Like Flora Yuknovich, Michael Armitage brings us straight back up into the contemporary world of art, and I'll be speaking to Hugo Cobb about it all. Welcome, Hugo. Thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Mary. It's a very exciting time at Sotheby's.
Yeah, I can't wait for you to tell me about these lots. First of all, we're going to start with the Michael Armitage. Tell me everything.
Yeah, we are so excited. This is the first time that we have a major and important example of Michael Armitage mature practice at auction. So this is Mulero Gardens by Michael Armitage, and the estimate is £1 to £1.5 million.
The thing is, I love the subject matter on this one. It's like, as a photographer, the composition, I kind of love, you know, you've got the baboons, and then the two people sort of, they're all on this, seems like the same focal plane, but I'm dying to know more about the story behind this one.
These are narrative paintings. They're of stories, but they're painted in this super, super engaging way where you've got stuff in the foreground and stuff in the background alongside abstract elements, and they sort of blend and meld together so that the artist is able to tell a narrative. In this instance, Mulero Gardens refers to a viral tabloid story from 2011. Which was a police sting operation, whereby the police installed hidden cameras in a spot where couples used to go and have sex in a public park.
Wow.
And then sold the resulting images to the press. So it's a tough subject matter, but Michael Armitage, this is the kind of thing he does. He focuses on the untold stories of East Africa, and in a lot of ways, the harsh realities of Kenyan life. So he might make a painting of political violence, or he's made a number of paintings about refugee scenes, and he's telling the stories that are not often presented to us, the viewers.
And also the type of canvas he uses, I think, is sort of important to his style of painting.
Exactly. So Armitage has spoken about how he wants to situate himself within an East African tradition of painting. So for him, he paints on lubugo bark cloth, which is a very, very traditional East African material. There's moments where it's stitched together. There are holes and imperfections in the canvas, or in the cloth, I should say. And it absorbs paint in a very, very particular way. Because that kind of a surreal, ethereal, but also allegorical use of animals is very, very typical of other artists within the East African tradition. And in this instance, well, within the East African tradition, baboons are supposed to kind of provoke the viewer to think about the short distance between human behaviors and animal behaviors. And obviously that links into the subject matter in quite a telling way.
Well, it's kind of interesting because growing up in a vegetarian family as well, I've always had huge respect for animals. And so that is one thing that struck me with this painting. It's sort of like dealing with animals and humans, like we're all animals, basically. It's sort of putting us all on a level playing field, which is something that really kind of draws me to this piece.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
And it's quite a large-scale piece.
Yeah, it's very, very large, sort of over 2 meters in height. And actually, when you stand in front of the painting, the thing that's most impressive is the sort of throbbing color and intensity. As I say, the medium, the lubugo bark, is very, very distinctive. The way that it holds color, it feels incredibly fresh and vibrant and immediate. And just the artist's mark making and use of color, it creates this overall impression that almost seems to vibrate with intensity. Michael Armitage, at the moment, is probably the most sought-after figurative painter on the planet. In the last 5 years, there's been a string of exhibitions at some of the world's most well-regarded museums, and sort of each one has been better critically received than the last. As I say, this is the first large, mature painting to appear at auction, and so it's a really rare event within the art market, and something that we're incredibly excited about.
And so now you're going to tell me about the Jana Euler piece, which is again another large-scale piece, isn't it?
She's an artist who never ever talks about her own work, but by considering her career as a whole, she's someone who we can say she's never made a bad painting, but she does take a kind of perverse pleasure in painting things that might be ugly or in deliberately bad taste, or garish, or gauche, or off-putting. And in this way, I guess in the internet age, we could almost call her a troll. She's deliberately trying to provoke her viewers. Jana Euler had a whole room displayed dedicated to her work in the Central Pavilion at the Venice Biennale last year. She's sort of being exhibited alongside, pictures like the ones around me in these sort of cathedrals of good taste.
It's like she kind of, in the serious settings, she kind of wants to remind people to have a bit of a sense of humour, or don't take everything quite so seriously. And also make you feel a little bit uncomfortable.
Exactly. I mean, they're sort of so gauche as to be surreal. When everyone else zigs, she's an artist who zags. And so, in these, whether it's the Venice Biennale or the evening sale at Sotheby's, in these rooms where you have sort of noble landscapes and very serious still lives, Jana Euler takes the opportunity to present us with a 3-meter foaming pint of beer. I think that's part of the surreality of it. It's such a prosaic, pedestrian, everyday subject as a pint of beer. Something that I think you might think is something that might not be worthy to have the sort of high praise of the art world lavished upon it. And yet Jana Euler takes the chance to present it in incredible photorealistic detail and executed on the grand scale of a history painting.
Well, thank you. I've really enjoyed chatting with you today.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
It's been fascinating, and I can't wait to see how these paintings do in the auction.
Thank you so much, Mary.
Thank you for joining me on the London Sales Gallery tour, and you can check out the auction live on the 1st of March to see the modern and contemporary evening auction and the now evening auction.